Mind that if you contribute by audio, folks later will be able to hear you. Anything you say in the chat won't be seen later. So thanks for joining us. Welcome to the workshop, and we'll introduce ourselves. So I'm Alana Westwood, and I'm delivering this workshop. I'm really excited to give it because I've written a lot of op-eds. I've run in-person workshops on how to write op-eds, and I really think it's such an effective tool for connecting researchers with the public, for helping researchers and academics hone the way that they speak and also ensure that expertise is heard. So I'm very excited about this. Myself, I've published in a number of different venues, and I actually got started writing for my university paper in my undergrad and built confidence from there, and now publish in national venues, just kind of worked my way up, even though I didn't have any expertise or training. So my hope is what I can do for you today is skip a lot of the rejections and missteps that I had to take along the way by really sort of delivering to you the pieces of how to put this together. And Kathleen Ifredi's interim executive director is going to be running the session and moderating it, so I'll let her introduce herself. Oh, Kathleen, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So sorry, just in case anyone didn't catch the first part, I am serving as interim executive director of Evidence for Democracy. I myself don't have a science background. I'm not a scientist, but I do have some experience in writing as well. And Elena and I have recently, well, I guess it's not as recent as I thought. Time is flying by here, but authored an op-ed together. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from for this workshop. And I'm happy to moderate today. So if you have any questions, like Elena mentioned, you can send me an email or get to me in the chat box, and I will help you if you're having any issues as we move along here. So a little bit about evidence for democracy for those who aren't familiar with us or our mandate here. So we are the leading fact-driven, nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization promoting the transparent use of evidence in government decision-making in Canada. And so some of you may know our work from either the Death of Evidence rallies, from going to Silence of the Loud screenings at our chapters across the country, or you're familiar with our research and reporting. But here's a little bit more about our approach to things. So we educate Canadians about the role and importance of evidence in government decision making. We do research government decisions and evaluate the extent to which evidence has been accurately used, and this is across a number of policy fields. And we do issue-based campaigns to advocate for the use of evidence in government policy decision making. And so, Elena said a bit before about everyone introducing themselves, and I had a couple here in the side chat who messaged me personally, and so maybe I can just read that out. But in the meantime, if you're able to go to the group chat box and type in a bit about yourself, or you can raise your flag. And this is a feature that comes with Fuse. So if you go to the three dots in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a number of options, and you should be able to raise or lower your flag. So if you're able to do that now, it's a good test. So if you go to the three dots at the corner there and click them and try to raise your flag, and I can see if it's functioning for everybody. That's great. Okay, looks good. So, perfect. I'm going to lower all those flags. And since there's a few of us here, I think it would be really helpful if we do get a chance to introduce themselves. So, Riley, if it's okay with you, I'm going to unmute you first, just because you had messaged me in the side chat. So if you want to do just a quick little introduction, and I will unmute you to go ahead and do that.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University. I'm just studying some conservation surrounding hydroelectric development and climate change in British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest.
Fantastic. Thanks, Riley. And I will just read out here. Melissa messaged me in the chat here. So Melissa Tier is with us. She's a sustainability manager in the US and a behavioral scientist. And if anybody in the meantime would like to introduce themselves, you can either send us a chat or you can raise your flag.
Okay, great. Well, we'll keep an eye out in the chat if anyone else wants to chime in. I know there's more of you out there, and I'd encourage you to be interactive with this. So I'm here to help you not just learn how to write an op-ed, but we are going to write the important pieces of an op-ed today in this workshop. So please contribute your ideas by chat or audio. Either works, and we can talk about them and workshop them and try and refine them a bit. So along with that interactive element, as I'm going through the PowerPoint, when you see a black text box, that is a question that has a corresponding space on the worksheet that I sent out. So when you see a black text box, go to your worksheet and fill it in. So perhaps you've printed your worksheet or just are taking notes. That's an opportunity to fill in that piece. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give an overview of what is an op-ed, who should write one, why should they write one. We're going to actually talk about the key elements of the writing process, and we're going to do some of those together. We're going to talk about pitching, and we're going to also work on pitches together. Pitching is when you approach a venue that you want to publish in and basically query them to see if they would be interested in taking your piece. What happens when you publish, how that process works, and then we'll finish with some Q&A. But we're a fairly small group today, so please, if you have questions, just type them in the chat as we go, or raise your flag, and I'd be happy to answer them as we go along as well. Okay, so what is an op-ed? Well, a lot of people haven't heard the term or don't know the term. And those that do often think that it stands for opinion editorial, referring to opinion articles or editorial pieces. And that's kind of true, but that's not the origin of it. So newspapers, all news sources typically have a slant. Perhaps they're to the left, they're to the right, they have a particular point of view. So the op-ed, standing for opposite the editorial page, was originally brought in to be an outsider commentary that served as a counterpoint to the newspaper's position. So trying to counter bias inherent in the preferences of the editors. The editor would publish their editorial on a given topic, and then a op-ed would offer a kind of counterpoint. These days, though, the term really refers to any short-form piece of argumentative writing for a general audience. So it includes not just newspaper pieces, but also blogs and pieces in magazines. They are still, almost every traditional newspaper does have an opinion section, though, and that opinion section will feature editorials from the newspaper staff and publicly contributed op-eds. So that is the piece that we are trying to write today. So why write an op-ed? Well, I asked you in the registration to let me know why you wanted to come to this workshop, and some folks had some really interesting answers. And though you're all here today learning to write an op-ed, so I'd like to ask you, tell me in the chat, why do you want to write an op-ed? Let us know in the group chat. Patrick Dunleavy is a scientist and science writer who does science communication training, and I really like what he has to say about it. So he says, one of the oddest things that people in academic life regularly say to me is, I'm not paid to write blog posts, just research articles. I don't have time to do blogging. You may be able to relate to that. I know that I can relate to that. The publishing process is grueling, the research process is grueling. For those who are students or faculty at a university, it may seem like this is something extra on top of all of your expected duties. However, in his article on how to write a blog post, which is in that resources sheet, he says, you've put 2 years of your life into doing the research. You've devoted months more to writing the paper and sending it to journals, dealing with comments, doing rewrites, and hacking through the publishing process. Why would you not spend the extra couple of hours needed now? When I read that, it definitely hit home for me that in terms of the hundreds of hours I've put into the research, it only takes an extra 2 or 3 hours to get it to the public who otherwise would never see it in an academic journal or behind a paywall or at a conference. So taking all that work and increasing the number of people who view it exponentially is only a couple of extra hours. At that point, it seems like it's worth taking the time. So again, if you have some reasons why you might want to write an op-ed, please throw them in the group chat. I think it may have not been turned on, but it is turned on now, so you can group chat with everyone. Some common reasons are a diversity of voices. I read a study recently that found that in major US newspapers, 80% of pieces featured on the front page were written by men, and the majority of those were white men over 40. So there's a real lack of diverse voices in traditional media. Writing an op-ed is a way to get more opinions, more perspectives out there. It's good to publicize your work. It will draw more attention to the work that you do. Advocacy and awareness is usually the reason that I'm writing op-eds, so trying to encourage folks who are reading it to advocate or to undertake some kind of particular action. Many of you may be interested in the myth busting or busting bad science aspect of it. Lots of misinformation out there, particularly on the internet, and writing an op-ed is a good chance to set the record straight. Believe it or not, it's good for your career. So being known in the public sphere, ultimately will help you in your academic career as well. If the media knows you as someone they can approach, if you're respected by the public as an authority on your topic. I also recently read, ironically, a study that found that 25% of people Googling for health information hit a paywall. So they're looking for information about their own health, and what they're looking for or they would like to find is protected within an academic journal or protected by some kind of paywall. So this is an opportunity to take your research, which would ordinarily be trapped behind a paywall most likely if you're publishing in academic journals, and get it out to the public where they can access it and make use of it. And finally, in this era of trumped up misinformation, it's a good opportunity to make sure that expertise is heard, and that, I believe probably everyone here cares about knowledge and about the truth being what it is that people are learning about and sharing. So this is a great opportunity to actually bring that directly to the public. Columbia University's Earth Institute summed up really well what the purpose, I think, of an op-ed could be or should be. They said a good op-ed or letter to the editor is concise, it hits hard, it marshals vivid images, analogies, and arguments. It's informed and backed by facts, not just emotion or opinion. Most editors see this as a section for advocacy, denunciations, controversy, and astonishment to stimulate community discussion and drive public debate. So that's why to write an op-ed. So what to write an op-ed about? Well, you need a topic, you need a motive. So I'd like to ask all of you, and please raise your flag or chime in the chat, because I want to workshop your op-eds with you. So I need to know, what's your topic going to be? What is one person, place, issue, incident, result, fact? What is your primary focus? So in order to get to the chat, you can click the square box at the bottom and write us your topics. Okay, if you need any assistance, you can also email us if you need some assistance with the program. So we've got an example. Got a couple of examples, great. One being an upcoming op-ed on science integrity being enshrined in collective agreement. So this is something exciting that just happened in Canada. The federal government has been bargaining with scientists for their collective agreement, and there was an ask for science integrity clauses to be included. John Palmer says we've anti-corruption in renewable natural resources in the tropics. Francis says ocean noise. I'm just gonna write these things down. Okay, good. So you've got a topic. Now, fill out that topic on the worksheet. Riley's got renewable energy development spatial planning. What is your motive? So what is the goal of getting your work or opinion seen by the public? So who are you trying to influence, and what action do you want them to take? Because every op-ed needs a topic and a motive. So I'll give you an example. I was just, and please type your motives into the chat box as well. I was just workshopping an op-ed with a colleague on a project I help out with on this endangered lichen called Fusco Pinaria leucosticta, which sounds terribly boring. And it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So we were workshopping an op-ed. The topic was this endangered lichen, F. leucosticta, and the effects of climate change on this lichen. And the motive was to get biologists to incorporate this lichen into their thought processes about conservation. So to get it as a species that people are noticing and thinking about when they're doing conservation, and not just polar bears or grizzly bears are the ones that everyone's interested in, but also to consider this lichen. So a clear ask for biologists to consider this species in conservation, and the topic, this lichen being affected by climate change. So anyone have any motives they'd like to contribute? Okay, John says to counter the ministerial statement, which is contrary to the Convention of Biological Diversity. John, could you tell us a little bit more about that? So I hope you're all writing down your topics and your motives in your worksheets. Because we'll need them later. Okay, so John says that the Convention of Parties on this issue is promoting civil society involvement, but the minister wants civil society out. So the motive is then to, I'm guessing, present the opinion that civil society should be involved in processes for anti-corruption in tropical renewable resources, something along those lines. Okay, great. Thank you for contributing. So I'll move on now to once you have a topic and you have a motive, then you need to think about what are the entire steps to getting this opinion written down, getting it supported, and getting it published. So the first we've done, chosen a topic and a motive, identifying what you want to motivate action with. The second is to choose your venue. We're going to do that together in a moment. Third is actually writing the article, which is actually not as difficult as writing other kinds of pieces, because it can be a lot more fun. You then need to pitch the outlet that you've chosen, the venue that you've chosen, and publish. So those are the 5 steps to getting your op-ed published. There is one more that I like to add that most people don't include, and that's outreach. So outreach is just a little bit extra step to make sure that your op-ed gets noticed, not just published, but noticed. Many people ask me, I've been asked this a lot, is should I pitch first or write first? Should I write the article and then pitch the newspaper and say, I have this article, would you like to run it? Or should I pitch the venue and say, I would like to write on this topic and not have written it? So if you pitch, there's a chance you'll get rejected. Sometimes it's a high chance. So some people think I may be wasting my time writing the article if I'm just going to reject it when I get pitched. So my response to that question is always, how fast can you write? If you can write really fast, and once you have practice with op-eds, you will be able to write them really quickly. I've seen people churn them out in an hour or two. Then pitch first, pitch a venue, say, I would like to write this article for you about this endangered lichen species. And if they say, yes, great, return it, give us a finished draft in 48 hours. We'd like to run it on Monday. Then you got to be able to write the article in 48 hours. If you're not yet confident in your ability to write it, I'd say write it first, pitch it after. And even if you get rejected, the worst that's happened is you've improved your writing skills. So you've chosen a topic and you've shared your topics with me. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the nuance of choosing a topic that editors are going to respond to, that editors are going to want to publish. So you want to choose something with a clear message. So something that you are invested in. You need to have an agenda. You need to care about this for whatever reason. Maybe you research it. Maybe you're just concerned about it. Should be simple. You can only talk about one issue. You don't have any room for more. So one person mentioned ocean noise as an issue. Ocean noise in general, there's many different kinds of noise in the ocean and many different effects that it has on marine wildlife, etc. So that would need to be pared down to maybe a specific region or an effect on a specific kind of wildlife, maybe ocean noise effect on whales, something like that. It should be timely. So you can actually think ahead. If you say you've submitted a paper, it's been accepted, but it's not being published until next month, that's a great time to write your op-ed now so it's ready to go when the paper comes out. For example, Kathleen was mentioning working on an op-ed about federal scientist integrity in bargaining agreements. We've known the bargaining was happening for the better part of the last year and that eventually an agreement would be reached. So that's something that there's going to be an outcome. You can draft the frame well in advance of the outcome. And then when it happens, you just kind of pop in the most relevant details and you're ready to go. So I'd suggest it's always really helpful to get started early and be ready in advance. And then it has to be something other people care about. So something that's controversial or has emotional appeal, that can be difficult, especially when you're talking about lichen. So we will talk a little bit later about some ways to accomplish that. Should also be within your expertise. And what does it mean to be within your expertise? Well, what credentials do you have that backs up your opinion? Maybe you've published a book on a topic, you've PhD in the topic, you've researched it before, reported on it before, you have job experience or a title that's relevant, firsthand experience with it, or even if you don't know about that topic, you have a record of publishing op-eds and pieces about other topics. That can be enough. If you don't have any of those forms of expertise, one thing you can do is you can actually add a co-author with credentials. So I want you to tell me in the chat or raise your flag why you are someone who is well suited to write about your topic. What expertise do you have? Fill it in on your worksheet as well. So one thing that is very common is to get a co-author. Team up someone who has skills with writing and someone who has a position or relevant expertise. One thing that I do working with Evidence for Democracy's network of experts is talk to a number of folks who would like to write a piece, publish it on their research, They haven't done it before, they haven't received any training in it, so I'll pair up with them. I'll do the bulk of the writing, they'll provide the expertise and refine it and make sure that everything's correct, and then we'll publish it together, we'll co-author it. So Riley has been studying the impacts of hydropower, and Riley's supervisor researches the area. So yeah, that's direct experience researching the topic. John is a known writer on the topic already, and the co-author has government experience and government exposure. So lots of sort of direct relevance there. That's great on both fronts. Okay, so once you've chosen your topic and your motive, you need to choose a venue. So venues can be of two types. They can either be traditional media, so that's kind of newspapers, magazines, or non-traditional media, blogs, online venues. And there are some trade-offs choosing between them. So if you want to get published in a newspaper or a magazine, that can be very good for your journalistic reputation. You know, there is a certain cachet to saying I published in the Globe and Mail or the New York Times or the Toronto Star. But you have to be realistic that if you haven't already been writing and publishing for a while, you're not going to get into those national papers. So you have to start more regional. However, a lot of them still have really high readership. Newspapers and magazines, though, are a little more restrictive. You have less room, usually about 600 to 750 words. It's harder to get accepted there. You can't include any images or figures, and editors have absolutely free rein to change your text as they like, to strip off your title and put on a new one if they want to. This has happened to me countless times, and it can be very frustrating, but there's nothing that you can do. John says that their target newspaper will take small tables and graphs. Okay, that's good to know. And some traditional outlets with competition from the online media are starting to be more flexible about figures. Typically, it can be challenging though. So online media is global, and it can have high readership or it can have no readership. There's a big range there. So you really have to sort of check the venue that you're looking at very thoroughly to see if they're actually getting to the people that you want to talk to. Usually get a little more room and more editorial control, and you can use figures and images. So some examples of traditional venues: the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the Metro city papers. These are Canadian examples. I know we have a few folks from the US on the line. Trade magazines are great. So, for example, in agriculture, trade magazines can be very important, and they're fairly easy to land a piece in. Society papers. I'm a member of the Canadian Society of Ornithologists, and there's a quarterly society paper that's kind of a mix of newsletters and thesis abstracts and research updates and a couple of manuscripts, but also has room for op-eds and contributed pieces. Those can be a great place to start too. Online, there are news blogs that have a similar level of recognition to traditional news media, like the Huffington Post or iPolitics, for example. Nature Online has a blog news outlet, Nature News Online. There's also aggregators that you can pitch to directly, and you can usually find them by topic. So Science Borealis is one, Impact Ethics is one. You can always self-publish your blog. It's very easy to start a WordPress or medium.com. Your readership will be low, but you'll have complete editorial control. Another good one is an NGO that's aligned with your work. We at Evidence for Democracy feature a lot of blogs from writers who are experts that are not on staff, who may not even be volunteers, who come to us and say, there is this issue and we think it's particular that your community knows about it, and we'll publish a blog on it. So lots of NGOs do that. They're always looking for content. Another great one is a funder or a research partner. Your funders are probably would love to feature, good news stories about your research or compelling takes on what you've done. John also suggests the newsletter or magazines of professional or trade associations. Absolutely. So please contribute in the chat. What venue would you like to publish your piece in? What venue would be most suitable? So in the lichen example that I was talking about earlier, a good venue would be the Lichen or Bryologist Society newsletter would be a good place to start to get to biologists who are interested in plant biologists, but also in a botanical population, botanical publication. Kathleen says, for me, it's often the Hill Times for very policy-heavy topics. Yes, the Hill Times is based out of Ottawa and covers a lot of what's going on in Parliament and is policy-heavy. I've published in a big range of venues, and it's been very specific to the topic, but also to the audience. So there's really no limitations. I've found that even sort of offbeat city papers that cover current events will be interested in a lot of different issues as long as you can put a local spin on it. So you really can massage your work to fit in wherever you'd like it to, but it's best to really think about exactly who you're trying to reach and also realistically who will accept your pitch. So feel free to chime in with a potential venue, or if you want to put up your flag and we can chat about what might be a suitable venue for your work. And remember that you're choosing a venue to reach a specific audience. So who do you want to influence? Are they going to be reading that? Oh, interesting. John says, we want to take the message into the enemy camp, challenge the government's own paper to publish the op-ed. That's a great idea to pitch them. There's a large chance that they won't accept it. So I would suggest having a backup in mind. And in your published piece that you pitch to this backup, you can mention that you initially pitched it to the government's own paper and that they were not willing or able to publish it. That might actually kind of add another level of intrigue to the story. So a couple of folks have talked about renewable energy, and there's a lot of really interesting venues for that. I would really suggest looking online to different blog sources for that, but also anything that covers climate change, climate agreements. There's a publication called Alternatives Journal that does blogs that I've published in a few times, and that might be a really good one to target. They have a good readership and would be very interested in renewable energy and items related to climate change.
Anna, before you go on, I just wanted to chime in really quickly because I think we've had some new people join us in the last few minutes. Just to let everyone know, and a reminder, if you do want to raise your flag, there's 3 little dots in the right hand corner of your Fuse screen, and you should be able to find the flag function there. And if you raise your flag and you have a microphone, we will unmute you to be able to participate. Otherwise, we are chatting in the group chat, so feel free to contribute there. And I will hand it back over to you, Elena.
Thanks for that. So once you've chosen a venue, you want to check out their editorial guidelines. They'll post them online and it will tell you who you submit to and the rules under which you submit. So make sure that if it says if we don't accept unsolicited submissions, don't send one. Journalists talk to each other. You don't want to be a reputation for somebody that a whole bunch of people have received unsolicited submissions from. Make sure to follow the rules about exclusive submissions. If it says we only accept exclusive submissions, that means don't pitch more than one outlet at the same time. So make sure you've heard back from the first choice before you pitch your second choice. It's helpful to be introduced to an editor by someone who knows them. So if you know someone who's written op-eds previously for that venue, they have worked with an editor, they may be able to introduce you. In general, try and write for a grade 8 to 10 reading level, and there are actually tools online, if you just Google for it, that will read your piece and tell you what grade reading level it's written at, which are very helpful because especially academics and scientists, we end up writing at higher levels without even knowing it. So I'd encourage you to check your work in that way and make sure it falls into that arena. Make sure to be respectful in your correspondence with the venue and be ready for rejection, especially if you're just getting started. It will happen. Everyone does receive rejections. For those who are researchers and academics, you've probably had your fair share of rejection already through the publishing and peer review process, so we tend to have a little bit of a thicker skin. But just try not to put too much personally into your work. It may not be a right fit for the paper, but still a good piece, and you can take it somewhere else. So once you've chosen the venue, the next step is writing and pitching the article, and we'll come back to this and workshop it in more detail. But I just want to talk first about publishing and outreach. Make sure that you are ready. Everything's going to happen really fast once it's been published. If you're breaking a news story with your op-ed, folks may contact you, reporters may contact you, so make sure you're available. Don't submit an op-ed the day before you go on your 2-week vacation to Maui. Make sure you've got a good chunk of time carved out to deal with responses if you think that they're going to come. Some advice: don't read the comments. Nobody takes this advice, but I'll give it anyway. You will regret it. I've been called a lot of names, and it's particularly worse for women writing on the internet. You can get all kinds of things. My favorite that I've been called is a lefty leaf licker, but I've received a lot worse than that. And also have a plan for outreach. So you should do some outreach. Send your op-ed to your colleagues, your funders especially. They would probably love to see that you're reaching a bigger audience using the money that you gave them. Post it on Facebook, contact allied organizations and tell them, hey, we just wrote this op-ed, and do you think you could circulate it amongst your listserv, amongst your society list? Think you could link to it in the pages of your society newsletter? That kind of thing. So you can expand your reach a lot that way. John suggests to read the comments. You may extract previously hidden information. That also can be true. I think it really depends on the venue that you're publishing in as well. Okay, so time to write the op-ed. Put our writing caps on, and the hardest part is getting started. It's always, for me, the hardest part of anything. Once I can get over the initial trepidation of, I don't know what I'm doing and how am I going to do this, and get into flow, it's fine. But getting started is the hardest part. So you can either start from a finished manuscript if you're a researcher and you want to write an op-ed about a study that you've done, or you can start from scratch with an idea. Either way, the format of the final op-ed is going to be the same. The format harkens back to grade 10 English class with the 5-paragraph essay, classic 5-paragraph essay. So you're going to start with an introduction. You are going to give your supporting points in paragraph, and in your conclusion, you're going to recap the issue and leave something that people are going to remember. That's the general frame. And don't worry about reading all this. This will be available later, so you can read this slide as well. But I'm going to go through each of these pieces. Okay, so the lead. So I am going to get all of you to craft a lead. So start crafting the lead for your topic. And I'm going to talk about some of the best practices for that. And then you can chime in with your leads in the chat. So the lead is the first line of your article. You need to start strong. It's the hook. It's what a person reads and decides if they're going to continue or if they're going to go make a cup of coffee and completely forget that they ever saw your article. So it needs to grab them and pull them in. It needs to set some direction for where you're going. So the lead needs to tell the reader in general what the op-ed's going to do. What is the op-ed going to tell them or ask them? Here's some tips. Don't start with something that I recently read. I recently attended this conference and they were talking about blah. Really anything with I. No one who's reading cares about who you are unless you're a famous movie star. They want to know the issue right off the hop, why it's relevant, and where you're going to go with it. So start working on your leads, and I'm just going to talk about a few examples of leads that I think work well. Okay, an op-ed I read recently by Andrew Coyne. Here's the lead of it. Last week's report of the Electoral Reform Committee may not have achieved much. The government could not have more forcefully rejected it had it thrown it in a trash basket and burned it, but it was still revelatory, at least in 3 ways. This lead does it all. So it's timely. Last week, the Electoral Reform Committee made a report. So this is relevant. This is news now. It makes a contentious statement. It says it may not have achieved much, which is a disparaging. People like a little controversy, a little insult. Then it has this really great piece of imagery. Government could not have more forcefully rejected it had it thrown it in a trash basket and burned it. Very evocative, very hard-hitting. And then it ends this sentence. So this is all still one sentence. It was still revelatory in at least 3 ways. So we know that Andrew Coyne is going to tell us 3 ways that this report was relevant and important and revealing, despite the fact that it's been rejected. So it's compelling. It sure made me want to read on, and I did. Here's another one. This was in The Guardian by George Montbiot. I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's very short, but very effective. Please don't read this unless you're feeling strong. This is a list of 13 major crises that, I believe, confront us. So he's saying, he's coming right out of the gate with an offensiveness, almost, a challenge. Don't read this unless you're feeling strong. Well, the reader's going to have this reaction of course I'm strong. I can handle this list of crises, and be compelled and challenged to go on. And then he says, this is a list, so you know that you're going to get a list and that they're crises, so that in itself is inherently interesting. Here's one that I wrote, and I'm going to include a number of my own examples throughout this, not because I'm particularly narcissistic, but it does give me a chance to give you an insight into the thought process that got me to the lead, which I think could be helpful. So I was writing about fungal disease in bats, and some people care about bats, but a lot of people think that they're pests or they're vermin, and they don't particularly like them. So with this lead, I say, although diseases often spread without killing many of their hosts, think the common cold for humans, sometimes a new ingredient can massively change the balance. So what I was trying to do there was compare to humans, so bringing an emotional appeal that people can relate to. They can think of the common cold as a disease, and then also put a sense of urgency into it. A new ingredient can massively change the balance, which tells the reader they're going to learn about this new ingredient, which is interesting because it's new and also because it's causing a massive change. Plus, it's talking about disease and death, and health is pretty interesting for most people. So please chime in on the group chat or raise your flag with a piece of a lead, or perhaps a start of a lead, or questions about a lead that you could write for your topic. I realize it does take a few minutes to craft one. Don't worry if it's any good or not. We're just kind of workshopping drafts here. Okay, I'll move on, but if you do, please feel free to chime in with a lead that you've written, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. From the lead is the body. So the 3 paragraphs that make your supporting point. Of course, your introduction can't just be your lead. You need to hash it out a little more, but that's all setting context. The body is where you make your arguments. So you have a few supporting points, each in a paragraph, and each paragraph leading to the same conclusion or the same ask. In your last body paragraph, you can preempt critics or counter arguments. Okay, John's got a lead. He says, in the minister's budget statement, he proclaimed something. This was contrary to the approved international policy in the following ways. Okay, I really like that first part. In the minister's budget statement, he proclaimed, which proclaimed is a very strong word. Proclamation suggesting sort of an absolutism. That's good. Once the details are fleshed out, you may want to go for something a little more emotional or harder hitting than this was contrary. You could say, this came to the shock of so many people that had worked so hard on this international policy, or this horrified these folks that had worked so hard on this policy. Something like that. Something to inject a little bit of human appeal into it. But I really like that strong start that sets the issue and sets the tone right off the hop. So returning to the body, I find to get the sense of what to do with the body down, it's really helpful to read and mimic op-eds that you like. There's lots of authors with lots of different styles, so find somebody whose pieces compel you. You want to keep reading them. You want to read more by that author, and try and mimic what they do, and then adjust it to suit your own needs. Don't be too serious. Have fun with it. A good pun never hurt anyone in an op-ed. Absolutely. A little bit of humor can go a very long way. And this is a space where you can be emotional. You can bring out that side that most researchers keep hidden, but it really does make it much more compelling for a public audience. So if you're going from manuscript to op-ed, rather than starting with an idea, so you've got a finished paper, and you want to turn it into an op-ed. Just a couple of quick tips for how to do that, because you may have a 3, 4, 5,000 word article. It's very dense, very academic. Op-ed is a different format. So the first thing you do is you need to reduce your article to 750 to 1,000 words. Just cut the whole method section. Keep one line at most if you have to. You can do pretty much the same with the results section. Reduce it to 2 bullet points that sum up your biggest results. You can take out most of the intro, and it's not going to go at the beginning. You put your lead first, and then you can put a few pieces of your intro to set context and give background. And make sure to remove anything that relates to intermediate stages, earlier models, anything that did not lead to results. You're focusing just on your main results, and anything supporting that. Preliminary work doesn't fit in this format. Okay, so your op-ed needs support, and as this is comms for scientists, so probably we're all very interested in supporting opinions and writing with evidence, with facts. So I'd ask those of you here, what is a fact in your discipline that could support your op-ed? So give me a statistic or a fact. So an example in this lichen that I was talking about earlier would be that the major predictor of the distribution of F. leucosticta is temperature, how warm the climate is. So this is a fact that ties this species' survival to the climate, and therefore climate change, which would be the focus of the op-ed. So write out a fact in the chat. So this is a statistic or two that you're going to work in to support your main thesis. And referencing is done in a particular way in op-eds. You're going to hyperlink in text. So no brackets, unless, of course, the particular venue you're looking at is asking for that. Usually it's almost always going to be hyperlinks. So you link directly to the source, whether it's a paper, whether it's an interview, whatever it is. You can also use interviews or quotes, and those can be very effective, especially if you're interviewing or quoting an expert. So I found when I was an undergrad writing opinion articles at first for the school paper, but also for other venues, I didn't have the expertise in the subject often myself. So I'd call up a few um, professors or government researchers who had expertise in that subject, and I'd ask them for just a couple of interesting facts, hard hitting facts about this, and then quote them in the text. And that was all it took to sort of elevate it to the next level. So one person's offered support that spills of diluted bitumen are bad for salmon. That's a good start, and I certainly think that's true, but it's even better to go for a more specific fact, like over the last 10 years, there have been 200 spills of diluted bitumen in this area, and they've caused a 30% reduction in the salmon population. So I'm just making these numbers up, but something that's specific and that carries this weight of statistics and expertise behind it.
One thing I was going to chime in with, Alana, was in reference to the op-ed that you and I wrote in October. We were looking at the government's performance on science in the last year, and it was almost as if we had sort of too many facts. We had a lot of policy we could go through and a lot of things we could draw on. And so I think, on this note, something that you and I had to go through, which, was sort of paring down those hard facts and that statistics into the most hard hitting points. And I think that is pretty important in my experience
Yeah.
in writing. But it's sometimes maybe a bit harder if you're talking about policy or things that are a bit softer. You really sometimes have to stretch to find those things that are hard hitting if you don't have those concrete quantitative facts behind them.
That's an excellent point. And I think that those who are writing from a academic perspective may have the problem that you said of too many facts. We've got this study that is a meta-analysis, perhaps, that shows all of these different effects of all these variables. Well, you can't talk about them all, so you have to pick just one or two that you think are going to be really compelling. And in those ways, it's sort of exactly an opposite challenge between that research or policy. And that's where if you reach out to someone else who has expertise, you may be able to represent those facts as a quote or get a quote from an expert, and that can sometimes help a lot if you don't have those facts. Someone saying so in the salmon example, salmon and oil spills, diluted bitumen, good quote from people affected directly by the issue, like fishermen or fish processors of salmon. That's great too. That's an approach. So traditional journalism is covering news, and they're supposed to do it in an unbiased way. So they'll often include interviews and quotes that represent different perspectives. In an op-ed, you don't need to cover all sides of the story. You just need to advocate your position and support it with good evidence. So quoting is a very good tool, and just make sure that the quote that you're using is in line with expertise or evidence. Okay, so you've got a body, it's supported, then you come around to the ending, and the ending is critical. So it's helpful if it echoes the beginning and has been foreshadowed. It should be a repetitive element where maybe you use a metaphor or a piece of imagery in the beginning that you repeat in the end. So for this lichen example that I was workshopping earlier with a colleague, she came up with the lead, lichens are one of the most neglected organisms on the planet. And here we have an opportunity to take care of them in this province, in the example that we were talking about. So a great way to end that would start the ending that's a bit confusing, sorry, with an idea of caretaking. So you hearken back. So you could start the ending with something like, in order to take care of this species, or in order to give this species, say, the tenderness it deserves, or something like that. And that automatically is a signal to the reader, okay, hearkening back to that idea of care versus neglect, which is already really evocative and emotional in itself. A lot of people react to those terms, and it tells you that the end is coming. It needs to include the most memorable detail, or it can be a call to action. It can be an instruction for your reader to take forth. The ending can also be open, that suggests or implies a conclusion, or it can be closed, which delivers a conclusion to the reader. So write your conclusions or some potential conclusion for your piece and let us know in the chat what it is. Paste it into the chat. Here's a few endings. So that article by Andrew Coyne that I talked about earlier, about electoral reform, finishes with this. He says, so that's one possible way out of this, referring to the position that he's advocated for moving forward. He says, I see it as being not just win-win, but win-win-win-win-win. The Liberals get to keep their promise, the Tories get their referendum, the other parties get the best shot they're ever likely to have at proportional representation. Any takers? So this ending, I think, is really good. It's got repetition. It harkens back to the original opening paragraph. This win-win-win-win thing is kind of a silly little tool, but it's memorable for that reason. It's ridiculous to write win that many times in a sentence, but it works. You're going to remember it. And then he ends with a open ending. Any takers? So that's, what do you think of this? He doesn't tell you what you should think of it. What do you think of this position that I'm advocating? And it's also a call to action. Any takers? Will you support this? Will you support what I'm saying? Really effective conclusion there. A conclusion from a piece I wrote, I delivered in a very traditional closed ending with a very direct call to action. So the end of this opinion piece was a direct instruction for what must happen next. I said the next step that must be taken in this country is commitments to evidence-based decision-making from politicians and support for research and monitoring institutions. Most of all, we need a regulatory framework that includes a very simple requirement. Absolutely no sailing can be done until we've got a map. So the ending is very hard-hitting. I've been working all the way through with this metaphor about sailing with and without a map, and that effects on scientists were sort of scuppering the boat. I've been playing with this metaphor all the way through. So it really harkened back to that, echoed it throughout, and delivered a really firm demand. So please, if you've got a conclusion, paste it in and we can workshop it a little bit. Okay, and if you pay, I know it takes a few minutes to write it, more than there's often time for, as I'm going through these things fairly quickly, but paste it in later and we'll come back and talk about it. I like to title the piece at the end, and titling the piece is the second hardest part of writing it. The hardest part is starting, the second hardest at the end is coming up with a title, because a title has to be memorable, and it's all that people are going to look at. It also should be tweetable, so it should be 140 characters or less. It needs to include narrative cues. You need to get it all from a title. It needs to be catchy, perhaps fun or compelling or insulting. It needs to be short, and it needs, that's, many of us, I think now, Facebook is the biggest driver of news, I believe. It's overtaken 50%. So that's all you get is a title, and maybe the lead will come up. So those two things need to hook someone enough that they're going to go forward with it. John's contributed a conclusion. This is great. He says, so we're going to do X, so we can conserve forest biodiversity and improve local likelihoods of small-scale loggers. But by doing this, what's being referred to as the topic, as the motive, it's not doing what the minister has imagined. I like that. It's got a human appeal to it. It talks about local livelihoods, small scale industry, and is flying in the face of what the evil character, the minister, has been set up as. So it's a very kind of traditional hero versus villain narrative, and that is a great way to approach an op-ed. We have a villain who's trying to do this bad thing X, and instead we promote Y because the little one, the hero, the underdog, it supports them. That's a really excellent tool to use in an op-ed, and it's a nice closed ending that delivers a conclusion. So going back to the title, try and write a title for a perspective piece, and I'm going to talk about some examples of good and bad titles. So put the title in the chat once you've got one. So some good examples of titles. Kathleen, did we co-author this one? I can't remember. It's Canada deserves a science and innovation system that brings real results. Actually, might have written that with a member of our network of experts.
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually think that was not me.
Sounds like a title you'd write, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was gonna say it does.
I really like this title. I think I was an author on it. It's hard to remember, but it delivers. It's short. It delivers a call to action right away. It says Canada deserves, and anyone who's reading this who either is a Canadian or identifies positively with Canada is going to have a reaction to that word deserves, because they want, they have some feelings towards the thing Canada, and they believe it deserves good things or bad things. They often, any Canadian certainly would have some investment. And then finishing with brings real results, that implies that what we have now, or had prior to this being published, did not bring real results. So it's compelling in the way that it suggests that there's a problem, and here this op-ed is going to present a solution. This one was written by a network of experts member and E4D affiliate who had previously experienced muzzling under the federal government and had left his position, and wrote this op-ed called "Let My Fellow Scientists Speak." It's only 5 words, but it's really compelling. It's personal. A personal story often resonates better than any statistic that you could ever use. And it's a direct call to action. It implies that there's a villain. Let my fellow scientists speak. Well, that begs the question, who is repressing them? Really, really good clickbait in that title, I think. Another one that I worked on with a colleague, clinical trials. I'm sorry I've misspelled it, trails there, but clinical trials need a healthy dose of transparency. So it's got a pun built right into it. Clinical trials, healthy dose, medical joke, haha, hopefully we get it. I believe John's contributed a title, Bye Bye Green Economy. Is this really what the minister intended? I quite like having a question at the end of a title. It automatically offers a demand that the reader can respond to. I would suggest getting a little bit more specific in terms of the green economy can be many things. It can encompass many industries. So specifically, what industry is being affected here? And the structure of it is really nice. It's snappy. So here's some bad examples of titles, and these bad examples that I'm going to share with you are from the Washington Post and the New York Times. You think would have learned to write titles by now. Apparently not. This article, called Barry's War Within, is about Barack Obama and some policy decisions that he was making that were in contrast to earlier positions from earlier in his career. But Barry's War Within doesn't mean anything. Probably, unless you're immersed daily in American policy, Barry may not even trigger Barack Obama. It might trigger your uncle. So it's just not a very effective title. It's too short. It doesn't have enough detail, and it isn't clear what the topic is or what the motive is. Another bad one, the NSA's doing what Google does. The NSA being the security force for the United States National Security Alliance Association, I don't actually know, is doing what Google does. Okay, but what is it that Google does? Is it searching the internet? Because that's not very interesting. It's just very vague. It's unclear. It does give us a subject, NSA, but it's sort of tenuously connecting us to Google, and a lot of people like Google and use Google, and it just really doesn't accomplish anything that you want to do with a good title. Just a bad example. There is a little get out of jail free card with titles. If you're submitting to a major publication, a traditional newspaper, magazine, or an online venue with a good reputation that's widely read, they will title it for you. You don't necessarily have to have a title. You can just give them the piece with no title. They'll come up with one, which, like I said, you get a free title and you save the agony of trying to find a snappy title, but there's just as good a chance the title they give you, you may not like it. There's also a risk that they will just rewrite your title for you if you don't like it, and they won't tell you before they publish it. I've been there a few times. So be ready for that. So general writing tips. In the worksheet that I handed out, there is a checklist of general writing tips. There's more here. I just want to highlight a few of them. Get personal and emotional if you can. That's so hard for people involved in science and research because we're told over and over again to keep the emotion out of it, that the emotion is bias. Well, when it comes to op-eds, the more personal you can get, the better you will be able to accomplish your mission, whether it's educating, motivating, starting in action, cutting through myths. The more personal you can get about it, the more effective you'll be at accomplishing your goal. Follow every rule that the venue sets out to the letter. They will reject you for breaking it, even if it has no relevance on the content of the piece. Follow your rule. And use short sentences and use as few words per sentence as you can. So identify every sentence that's over 15 words and try to reduce it as much as you possibly can. Emotional appeal, like I said, is so important, but it can be so hard. The most compelling story is often your own. So if you can tell a story of how it affects you, that can be really, really effective. And you can blend the personal and the scientific. So this is a screenshot from an op-ed that I wrote with a colleague that is about clinical trials. And the op-ed is about the movement to report on all clinical trials, but it tells an anecdote of a loved one who is on medication and that this medication has been subject to clinical trials. This is something that pretty well everyone can relate to. All of us have someone that we care about, someone in our family that's taking some kind of medication, and the evidence for that medication may or may not be skewed depending on how the trials determining its safety are reported. So that one really got quite a response because people want to share their own stories about their experiences with drugs. Try not to come across as angry. Coming across as angry will have people respond angrily and not usually in a nice way. It makes your reader automatically defensive, and as unfortunate as it is, if you are, as an author, are a woman, or if you're not a white person and you come across as angry, you will be immediately panned as just being the angry woman, and your claims will be dismissed. So try not to use an angry or aggressive tone. Unless you're looking to pick a fight, then by all means go for it. But if you want to accomplish your goal, if you want your motive to be realized, try not to use anger. So what emotion could your piece appeal to? So you can write it in the chat. write it down on your worksheet. Based on some of the things that folks chimed in with earlier, there are a lot of different options here. I think one person had mentioned ocean noise, and a good emotion for writing about ocean noise would be to appeal to a sense of caring, a sense of empathy with these organisms that are suffering the results of noise, whales, dolphins, etc. So coming at it from a perspective of maybe comparing it to children. There's been studies that show that kids who are raised in noisy environments, close to airports, close to train tracks, etc., actually have lower IQs than kids that are raised in less noisy environments. Of course, epidemiology is messy. There could be lots of confounding factors, but you could draw that parallel. Say, you know, these effects of noise on these organisms are like the effects of noise on kids, which damages their IQs, which hurts their opportunities. Drawing that parallel, bridging sort of that human animal empathy gap. One person had mentioned doing spatial planning around renewable energy projects. In that relates to climate change, and a lot of people use fear when they're writing about climate change. I don't find fear as a great motivator. It will be effective in getting your piece read, but I don't think it's going to be effective to motivate your audience to action. So opportunity and hope might be a good emotion there to say, you know, by citing renewable energy developments in this way, we can move forward together in a hopeful manner, in a positive manner. Here's the positive effects that it's going to have on the community. So I think hope would be a really good emotion to appeal to there. Metaphors are very helpful. Metaphors, I find they have to happen organically. Sometimes as you're writing, you'll think of other things. They're hard to force. One that I use and I've recommended, I think just previously, is when you're doing non-human animals or plant species to compare it to humans, because it's easier for people to relate to human suffering, the general person, than animal suffering. So a piece that I was writing about a new way of keeping track of species recovery. So how a species is recovering. It was kind of a very technical thing. I was explaining a method of categorizing and applying different ratings. It's not that interesting for an op-ed. So I picked a poster species, the rusty blackbird, which is a common species. It's declined by 96% in the last 40 years. And I analogized it to a human experience of being in a hospital, of that kind of population decline, talking about health decline in an individual. So I opened the op-ed with, imagine you've just opened your eyes and you're in the hospital. You've had surgery after a catastrophic heart attack. You're lucky to be alive. A nurse comes to check on you. You're awake, he says, and then promptly puts you in a wheelchair, pushes you beyond the sliding doors, and leaves you. Your care and your health coverage is over. You're on your own. This sort of treatment is unthinkable for a human, but that is what it's like for an endangered species in today's world, even those that are legally protected. So drawing this metaphor between what I'm trying to accomplish, okay, I'm trying to raise awareness and empathy for endangered species. I have to start with something that someone can relate to in their everyday experience, drawing that metaphor. Is there a metaphor that you can use? Feel free to contribute one in the chat. And it's really depends on topic, but there is usually something out there, something that's relevant to folks' everyday life that you can really play on. Okay, so you've written the piece, you've got a lead, some context for the introduction, some body paragraphs, each with supporting points and statistics, and a conclusion that echoes that lead and delivers an ask. Then what do? Then you have to pitch the venue that you've chosen. So what exactly is a pitch? It's a short 250 or so or less word email, used to be a letter, of course now it's an email, that states what you're doing, what you're writing about, and why your editor that you're writing to of this venue should publish it. So I've put in those worksheets that you got a pitch template, and it's just a fill-in template. And actually, if you've been following along with this workshop and writing out those pieces, a lead, a statistic, a venue, a motive, then you're ready to go. You've got the pitch. So typically, your pitch occurs just in an email. You don't want to add any attachments. They'll delete it immediately if there's attachments. You title the email with the word pitch, and then you add the title of the article after, presuming you have a title or a working title. So that's why it's helpful to write one. You can also write time sensitive. You can say pitch and then bracket time sensitive, close the bracket, and then put your title. If it's something that is only relevant in the next week, you can add that. In the body, you address the editor by name. It shows that you've done your homework and you've figured out which editor is relevant. You take your lead and you start with it. Just paste your lead right in the top. You can then give a little bit of context, include your strongest statistic or quote, and then deliver your conclusion or call to action. So it's like a preview of the whole op-ed right at the top. You then tell the editor why your readership will be interested, which is the motive. And then you give your expertise. So you state what are your qualifications and why you're well positioned to offer the expertise on the topic of your choice. If you have a previous publication record, you should definitely mention it. And if you have your work online, whether it's your academic work or your writing work, link to it. So I would encourage you, if you want to be writing op-eds, to have a website. You can make one for free and just record your work there, both academic and op-ed or journalistic writing, because it's really, really helpful. It shows that you're established writer, that this isn't just a one-off thing you're doing on a whim, and they'll take you seriously. So that's how you pitch. I'll show you an example pitch. It may be a little bit difficult to see this depending on your screen size, but this is a pitch Kathleen and I made to the Toronto Star, and it worked. They actually, I believe we may have made this pitch before we finished writing it, I think, and I sent it at 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. and I got an email back at 1 p.m. that said, "Send us the finished piece by the end of the day. We want to publish it tomorrow." And I kind of freaked out a little and was like, I had to make an excuse to pretend that I hadn't not written it yet. I managed to get it to them the next day, but I remember it being a bit of a slam to finish that. So in that case, I had actually pitched it not thinking that they'd respond so quickly, and I learned that one the hard way. So I started the pitch with saying the editor's name, and I'd worked with the editor before, so I reminded them of this. That's really important, and linked directly to the piece that I had worked with them on so that they could see what my writing was like. I offered them the op-ed exclusively. I said, I have another op-ed exclusively available for you, evaluating liberal performance on science. They want to know it's exclusive, and gave the topic. Then I put in the lead, which is the same lead that's in the finished article. I put in the conclusion, which ended with a call to action, and then gave some background on Kathleen and myself, and why we're well positioned to report on it. I also included a little bit more of results, so you don't always have to follow the same format, but you definitely want to make sure you get a few good points in there about why it's relevant for your paper. So this pitch example is also in your worksheet, so if it's helpful for you, you can refer to it later when you're crafting your pitch. So you've pitched, say, now what? You paste that pitch into the body of an email. I'm going to say that again, not as an attachment. You paste it, keep it short, 250 words or less. Make sure you've included your qualifications, and pitch one media outlet at a time. If it's time sensitive, Pitch the most likely venue to publish it, which is probably going to be a smaller venue. If you have a week or more, pitch the venue with the highest readership. They will probably take 3 to 4 days to get back to you. They will get back to you eventually. And if they reject you, then you can kind of work your way down. So it's nice to make a little bit of a wish list of your top 3 or 4 venues. Start at the top, and if the issue is not super critical, you can work your way to the bottom. Another thing that's helpful is if you can prepare in advance, you can actually pitch in advance. So you can say, this event is happening on January 4th. I'm sending you a pitch today, December 14th. I would like you to run it in your newspaper on January 4th. And then if they say no, you try the next one. So that way you can secure it to be as timely as possible for what you're talking about. You've pitched, you've got a response. Say you've been rejected, what you can do is respond with a thank you. If you're strategic and charming with your response, and if you outright ask them, as I think John mentioned, the editor may explain to you why the piece didn't work. And that's a good chance to take some constructive criticism and improve it. Send it again right away somewhere else. Keep going until you've exhausted your list of venues. As you refine it, and especially if you get some help refining it, somebody will take it. Say they're just not getting back to you in a timely fashion, you've waited a week and you haven't heard back, you can send one follow-up email. And in that follow-up email, tell the editor, I haven't heard back from you regarding my op-ed. Include your original pitch in the email under your signature. Say, I would still like to offer it to you, but the issue's timely. If I don't hear from you by the end of the day, I will send it somewhere else. So it gives them an ultimatum. And if you don't hear from them at the end of the day, do what you threatened and send it somewhere else. Lastly, say you've pitched and it was successful. You may have to make edits on a very quick turnaround. Be ready. Also be prepared, like I said, for the newspaper to change your headline to something totally ridiculous that completely misrepresents everything you were trying to do with the work. Nothing personal, just happens. Be ready for negative feedback, and be ready for the media to want to talk to you about it. What now? Through this workshop, we've talked about these op-eds. We've talked about some of the key components, workshop some of them together. So now take your topic, and I encourage you, write and publish an op-ed. In this hour and a half that we've been workshopping, that's all the time it takes to write a draft of your op-ed. And as folks that have attended this webinar, and for members of Evidence for Democracy's network of experts, we are here to help you get these things published. So please send me a draft, send me a pitch. I will help you work on it, refine it. I'll help you pick a venue. Happy to have a phone call with you about it. If you're not feeling like you're comfortable, you want to write it yet, but you want to just kind of talk it out and workshop it, really helps to do that. I'm here available to do that, but talk to your colleagues as well. Really anyone who's interested in writing or reading about the issue. You absolutely can publish an op-ed on your research, no question. No matter what it is, there is a venue that will publish it. It's a matter of finding it and being compelling and choosing the right angle. So we're absolutely here to support you for that. We've worked with lots of members of the network of experts to publish op-eds, and I would encourage you to do it. I know you're here because you're interested. Go ahead and make it happen. So thanks for coming today to this. It was a lot of fun to put this together. I'm clearly very passionate about getting work out to the public in this format. It's one of my favorite formats. And this is the end of Evidence for Democracy's 3-part pilot series. If you missed the first 2, we do have them available online, so you can see the first 2 Comms for Scientists webinars. We are going to have some more webinars in the future, so if you're on the network of experts, you will get emails about it. And also, if you want to suggest a topic for a future webinar, or we also do in-person workshops, to host a workshop at your institution and actually spend a day writing op-eds, working on media training or advocacy training, get in touch with me and we can we can chat further about it. So at this point, that's the material. I know it was a lot of material. A couple of folks have had to head out as we've reached the end time. But any questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to answer in the chat, put them in the chat, or raise your flag, and we can also unmute you. Kathleen, as someone who's written a number of op-eds, and I know you've also ghostwritten op-eds for other people, any tips?
I think you covered most of it. The only thing that came to mind when you were talking about pitching and not hearing back is often picking up a phone. If you can get somebody on the other end, that can be really helpful. That's in my experience. Otherwise, I think you covered, a lot of any of the advice that I would have. It always feels a little bit freeing to ghostwrite op-eds. It's a little less nerve-wracking when your name's not on it, but I know for many folks, myself included, sometimes writing an op-ed can be a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. But like you said, it is entirely possible. And there's lots of supports out there. And I think you'll, in the resource list that you sent around, Elena, you do include a number of helpful resources on op-eds that are beyond us and the network of experts. So there is a lot out there to support people in doing that.
Could you just speak a little bit more about ghostwriting op-eds? Like, who would do that and when would that happen?
I mean, I've done it for a number of NGOs and folks, and it's usually about giving, the first draft of something. I found there's been times where, you have this specific person in mind who kind of is the primary voice on a topic, and they may not have the time to fit in getting an op-ed done on a very time sensitive topic. And so I've written a draft in the past and written it with them, and it's a very similar experience to what you've explained. I mean, it follows all the same principles. It's just handing it off at the end of the day. And I think, a lot of executive directors for a number of NGOs don't necessarily write all of their op-eds, or at least the first few drafts themselves. So it is far more common than I think people realize. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly part of what's out there for op-eds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's interesting because ghostwriting is something that's really prevalent in books, in op-eds, and there's a lot of ethical debates about ghostwriting. I myself love recognition for writing, so I really struggle with it, and I think that everyone involved should be recognized. But sometimes it's the best way to get a message out there. If you have a targeted ask, and there is one person who is well positioned to deliver that message, but they can't write it, you can write it for them. So it can be a bit of a conundrum.
I think in a lot of advocacy organizations, it's especially important to be timely and to have the gravitas of a certain person be involved. So I think that's in my experience where it's happened most commonly. But I'm sure, as you say, it is a lot more widespread. Yeah.
John says another thing is that if you can buy a drink or a lunch for a journalist or an editor, that's usually a good investment. I haven't tried that personally, but I can see how that would be.
Having friends helps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any other questions or comments from folks?
I think too, one thing I wanted to mention on the questions, and you mentioned us giving support, is even beyond this op-ed, we do offer media support to our network of experts members in a number of fashions. So especially if you go back and watch our previous webinars, if you have questions about press releases, media advisories, anything like that, we are certainly happy to help with those pieces as well.
Yeah, it's amazing that there are a lot of expectations placed upon researchers, particularly that they should be able to respond to the media or should be able to publicize their own work. I think departments are really expecting people to do a lot of the legwork for that and not given the training to do it. So it's important to get that training and that experience. And I'm glad it's a lot of fun, I think, for us to help be a part of that. So there's resources out there and lots of resources beyond us as well. So I'd encourage folks to pursue that absolutely. I think there's no further questions. A couple of kind comments. Thank you so much for coming and for participating. I know it was a lot of material in a short time span, but moving forward, we're happy to work with you further on these outlines, and this will be available again. So for those that want to go through it more at their own pace and work on writing out those leads and conclusions and titles as they're going, have a little bit more time to chew through it, that will be possible. So thank you so much for coming, and please stay in touch.